All right. Yeah, if you don't mind. Um, all right, we're going to jump right in. And like I said, we've had a really good 3 days. And we want to see if we can kind of go through and hit a little bit of the foundation of where we're thinking and then kind of dig into some of the overall strategy. But before we do, I think one of the things that Mary asked us about yesterday was some of the target market definition and um, the overall strategy, communication strategy. And I will say one of the things that we always focus on is it is very, very important to recognize and understand that a communication strategy has got to employ both an internal and external market. And a lot of time, the internal market is the one that gets ignored because it's not very sexy to market to your friends and neighbors. Um, I can't tell you how many times I work with a community, and the first thing they want to do, hey, come on in. Perfect. Perfect timing. The first thing they want to do is blow $4,000 on a business card size ad in Southern Living so they can tell people we're advertising in Southern Living. Um, your own friends and neighbors are the ones who are delivering the brand message. They're the ones who are delivering the experience. They're the ones that are cultivating the community. And they're probably also the ones who are most likely to be the next business owner, to be the next property owner, to be the one who might expand their own business and employ new people in the community. So being able to truly cultivate that local pride is very, very important. And I think a lot of times that's overlooked. But then there's also the external target markets. And you have several organizations in this county who are created and funded to create a dialogue and target a message to specific target markets. So one is that economic development organization on the countywide level. They're the ones that are using the perfectly positioned tagline are positioned perfectly, and they are they're the ones who are really doing that kind of big business recruitment, the industrial development, the what you would say would be heavy economic development work. Now that doesn't mean that the city doesn't do any of that, but there is an organization that is funded and their goal is to, from kind of a holistic standpoint, hey y'all, come on in. From a holistic standpoint, their goal is to really continue to grow that the economy of the place. The second, obviously, is the visitor message, and that visitor message is crafted to people outside the locality. A lot of times, there's actually a defined mileage radius. Some people say 100 miles. They say by nature a tourist comes from 100 miles away. But to be completely honest with you, I like the terminology a lot more talking about visitor economies. Um, Realistically, I don't think anybody thinks that Clinton, North Carolina is going to become a tourism mecca. I think that's fair to say. And to be honest with you, I also don't think that Clinton, North Carolina wants to have the infrastructure required to entertain tourists. You do want to have the infrastructure to entertain visitors. Those visitors come from a more local base. As we went through and we started to study some of the data about I-95 traffic and the demographics of those travelers through this state, the majority of those travelers are North Carolina and Virginia travelers. So there's a much smaller kind of geography. It might sound really, really sexy to go and do a remote campaign somewhere, but is it going to be effective for your investment? So being able to have that CVB, be able to focus on cultivating that visitor message, and then making sure that everything that Clinton does is compatible with that. And I think that everything that Samson CVB has done with the Cultivate Your Spirit and all their marketing pieces and everything, right online. The one that really is the most shared is that local message. And you've got some functions of your city government where you need to be able to communicate and cultivate the message with your locals. You've got to really focus in on the community pride. I think one of the things that I really felt like as I traveled around was I feel like there's a high level of community pride. And I connect community pride directly to aesthetics. If you can drive through neighborhoods throughout the community and relatively independent of socioeconomic level, you see a certain shared standard for how your home is kept and the respect that you have for yourself and for your neighbors. I feel like that's a direct correlation with pride. And I do this a lot. I go a lot of places. I was extremely impressed with what I saw in Clinton. It doesn't mean that there aren't some things that need some work. Doesn't mean there are not some houses that probably could use a coat of paint and some maintenance and that kind of stuff. But and I think Aaron can probably echo in on this. But you are of what we call Midwestern standard. There is something about the Midwest where they are the cleanest, nicest, most well kept neighborhoods, and you all really evoked that feeling that I see and experience when I'm in the Midwest, when I'm in Wisconsin, when I'm in Iowa, that kind of stuff. I thought that was interesting, and I thought it was a huge positive. Then you also have marketing all of the activities that happen downtown. So obviously we've got our Main Street organization, which is going to be focusing in on that, and then also all the different entities and groups that work on marketing culture and arts and kind of the arts element of the community. So every single organization has its own defined target market and it has its own strategy for how it's going to communicate to them. I don't want the city to feel like they have to bear the brunt of doing all of those things. We need to make sure that we focus on having the tools in play to be able to collaborate with those other players. Now, I'm going to pass it on to Aaron, who's going to talk a little bit about some of the work that he did, taking some of the initial data that was shared during the Main Street assessment and enhancing it.
This is something that you all didn't contract us to do in this project, but we felt like it was important to give you all a better understanding of what your market base is, as well as what some of the opportunities are for you guys in terms of targets and those sorts of things. So what we wanted to do is give you some more data that better describes that market. What we made sure that we did for those of you in here that are involved with the Main Street organization, a couple of years ago you had the assessment that came in here. One of the things that North Carolina Main Street did was provided you with some data and an analysis of that data. So we made sure that we built off of that research that was done before. Now, granted, it was only 2 years ago. So, 2 years from that, in a recovering economy, the data's probably not going to be drastically different. But it does give you two different snapshots in time that you can compare. In fact, we made sure that we used the exact same data sources that they used. There's different types of marketing services that you can use to pull this data. We use the same exact data that y'all used before so that you're comparing apples. One thing that we did do that was different was we tried to broaden the base of information to give you a better understanding of the city as a whole and the city's market, because obviously what we're doing here is we're looking at downtown, but the branding and marketing strategy is for the entire Clinton community. So really the biggest thing we did that was different than what was done before was broaden those trade areas and broaden that net, that geography from try to make it again a little bit more relevant to the larger community. There are, well, and that being said, what we did is we looked at, rather than arbitrary, like circles, concentric circles to pull data from, the market doesn't observe political boundaries. It doesn't matter if someone lives just outside of the city limits of Clinton, downtown, the community is relevant to them. They are part of this market. So the market doesn't observe political boundaries, but it also doesn't observe just random things like concentric circles. Short of doing a true market definition study, about the best thing to do, which is still relatively valid, is looking at drive time scenarios. So what we did is we looked at a 15-minute drive time. These are the folks that live very close to you all within the city limits, but also really the people that, for the most part, would call Clinton their home, even if they don't live in the city limits. Then we broadened it out to, and that could be considered your primary trade area. Then we broadened it out to about a 30-minute trade area. These are folks, they may live in, like, say, for instance, Roseboro. I think that's a good example. We talked about that yesterday. Those folks are in Sampson County. They certainly can come downtown to go to Alive After 5 or come downtown to go to Fredo's, but they also can just as easily go over to Fayetteville. It's about the same distance, the same amount of time. That larger, broader area, which encompasses much of the county, and even probably goes a little bit outside of the county in areas, that's probably your secondary trade area. So that was the foundation from the data that we pulled. Ben, you go to the next slide. We did 2 key studies. We haven't done the analysis yet because we haven't had the time to really dig into the data. The first thing we did is what's called a market segmentation study, and it's a bridge between demographics, just straight up population, income. This is what's happening in the community. This is who the people are in the community, and really who those people are, what the socioeconomic characters are of the people that live in your community, what the consumer buying patterns are for the people that live in the community, the activities that they like to get involved in as residents of the community, and it even drills down to ways that they consume information, some ways that they get communicated to. So the market segmentation study, which was also done in that, and this updates it, and the data was a little bit different, basically, slices and dices the people that live within that local immediate region into a number of different segments. And you can see the different names of the segments here. And Ben, you can go to the next slide. Like I said, I'm not going to go into detail, but the biggest one was Southern Satellites. And this particular segment, like I said, they have certain demographics, they have certain socioeconomic characteristics, they have certain preferences when it comes to consumer patterns and the like. I think there was about 10 different segments that you all have. Probably the majority were in about 4 different segments. That really describes, again, who your market potential happens to be within your main local area. We're going to dig into this a little bit more, and we're going to have some analysis on this when we finalize the report. This one's just another segment, and then Ben, you can go to the next slide.
Well, and what I do want to say on this is, why is this important? I think one of the big things that you've got to be real mindful of is not just what that psychographic breakdown looks like now, but as you're able to get in and evaluate those segments that make the community up and the percentage of segments that make the community up. I think that one of the things that we can do is we can look at those segments and figure out what segment might offer the best growth opportunity.
Right, exactly.
So, like, for example, the Southern Satellites tend to be a little older than the national median average. So, what do we want to do, or who might we want to target that might have a little bit lower average age, a little bit higher household children number, that kind of thing? figuring out the markets that you want to build that's going to help create the overall more diversified um, economy. I think that's what we're really kind of shooting for with it. And the great thing about the psychographic data is it helps us to know exactly how to communicate to them.
Right, and you know, really, you know, the sky's the limit in terms of what this data can tell you. It says, okay, say you have someone who's thinking about opening up a restaurant in your community. You know there's demand for it. You know, you do your market research, you know there's demand for it. But what kind of restaurant? Well, this tells you, okay, these are the larger segments of the community. This can be part of their business plan to understand, okay, how do we attract this particular segment? Same thing if you're thinking about starting up a new event. We talked a lot about events for younger professionals in the community. We talked a lot yesterday. We talked a lot about the fact that right now, Alive After 5 is actually being successful in sort of engaging the younger population in this community. So again, that segmentation stuff can help that. But also, like Ben says too, if there's a certain segment that you want to grow in your community, retirees, empty nesters, maybe they're not represented here right now, but this data can help us understand how we may be able to attract those people.
Yeah, and this, I think the thing that I like so much about this is as soon as you start reading those preferences, I mean, the insight that it shares is pretty interesting. This one, for example, you know, it talks about how these heartland communities, these folks, they like to work on their house. They're likely to go to your Ace Hardware or Lowe's. I thought this was interesting. They're still catalog ordering. They're ordering from QVC. They might have an active relationship with an Avon salesperson. And it was funny because just earlier this week, I was talking to somebody, and they were trying to describe someone to me, and they were like, "She still has an Avon lady." And I was like, oh, okay. So, you know, it was interesting. They shop at Walmart. They shop at Kmart. They're completely comfortable buying groceries at the Supercenter. Their favorite restaurants are Golden Corral and Cracker Barrel. These are the people that when you ask them, what do you want in the community? They'd say, oh, if we got an Olive Garden, it would be amazing. And the day would be done, and they wouldn't need anything else. They would be content. So, you know, being able to get in here, it talks a little bit about some of their habits as it relates to potential media. And that's important as well. These folks, they go hunting and fishing, but they also read about hunting and fishing. They read publications that are interest-based. So it really will help you all to have the information that you need to make intelligent choices as you begin to market the community.
And then finally, the other thing, I won't go into any more detail.
This is the best slide ever.
Yeah, can you all read all that? I'm going to go over every one of these numbers. Again, this is something that was done in the previous analysis that you all had, but we broadened the geography of the trade areas that were more relevant to the community as opposed to downtown. But basically, what this is a retail leakage study, simple supply and demand based on the people that live here in the community. What types? It boils down to what are our opportunities to grow retail, commercial, and restaurant businesses here in our community? What is their demand for? When you overlay that with segmentation, that really gives you a lot of powerful data for you all to understand from a local standpoint and from a city standpoint. You know, what are some of the businesses and potential investors that we need to recruit in the area? So anyway, we've actually gone into more of this than I intended to, but I just want to let you guys know that we are looking at some data points. We will have some additional analysis that's absolutely relevant to communication.
And the interesting thing about this is for all the people in the community who say that they don't agree with purchasing alcohol, this proves that they simply drive to the neighboring places to purchase alcohol. Two of the stats that kind of jump out, I always kind of look at because we know that plays a direct role in downtown redevelopment, especially the ability for restaurants to make their numbers work. You've got beer and essentially beer and liquor stores, And those stores are selling $194,000 here in the trade area, but the consumers are spending $636,000. So you're losing almost 2/3 of the expenditures to other places. And then if you look at the food services and drinking establishments, now granted, this is a little more something that would classify as a drinking place. That is a bar. It's not a bar and restaurant, it's a bar. So that's not necessarily as appropriate, but I think one of the things that's interesting is you're bringing in 121,000 in the category, and consumers are spending 873,000. So you're losing $750,000 in going outside. So, those are some interesting numbers that will all kind of factor into the overall. But whenever you see green, that is an opportunity. It's real money that already exists that is going somewhere else. And whenever you see red actually has the opportunity to show you that you've got a niche potential. You're doing something really, really well. So for this overall area, like down at the bottom, there's a big red number in limited service. Well, that's fast food restaurants. So of course, if you look at that greater rural area, of course, you're doing really well with fast food restaurants because you do have a lot of fast food. So that's what, Aaron will do a real good job kind of helping to understand that. We know that this by itself is not a compelling, there's nothing easy about this sheet, but it's the information that we pull from it that can be really helpful. All right, from that, I want to go ahead and I want to jump into the identity system. And I think one of the places I want to start with is we really try to recommend an overall system, a series of components that allow you to have a foundation that allows the communication to grow and expand. So the first place that I always like to look is I like to look at typeface. Define typefaces that we can use to kind of connect the dots. Now, I looked at a lot of the things that already existed. I think that there are a lot of good things that are already here in the community. The stuff that Samson CVB is doing is really good. But I also know that from the first visit here, there were a lot of words that you all described in terms of what you wanted to see. You wanted to see something that was fresh. But fresh didn't mean contemporary and techy. It was still grounded in being a traditional place. But it was clean, it was fresh. It was vibrant was a word that was used over and over again. We want to see something that's vibrant and has life to it. So what I did was I selected two different typefaces. The top is a traditional style serif typeface. It's inspired by the one that the CVB uses. It's not the same, but they've got some similar elements in terms of curvature to some of the letters. So they'll be very, very complementary together. But one of the things I had to be real considerate of is when you select a typeface, especially like I had said to you all before, this is the fourth Clinton that I've worked in. So I know that a capital C sometimes can be pretty and sometimes can be horrible. So I needed to make sure that whatever selection worked with your name, because I didn't think you would let me come back and say we need to change the name to something else. So, so we stuck with that. But then what I wanted to do is I wanted to couple that kind of progressive serif with a clean sans serif typeface. So the thing that you'll see up top is going to be the primary identity typeface, and then the one below is our accent typeface. Now, I did something really interesting here that I've never actually done before, but as I started to deal with things that had to do with city market, whether it was the farmer's market or events at the market, I also brought in a third typeface that would only be associated with things around that venue. And it's called a slab serif. I will see it and look at it as we go through. So then the next thing that I did was I wanted to pick our colors. And I wanted to create a consistent base of colors that we could use over and over again. I ended up defining 7 different colors. I knew that I wanted a lot of different colors, and I will say I'm going to be completely blunt with you all. When you have a lot of colors, you have to be very, very sensitive to how that color spectrum appears. Um, there, because of the world that we live in today and the society that we live in, if images and colors look too much like a full spectrum of the rainbow, it turns some people off. So I always make sure that if I'm using a big color palette like this, that everything is very thoughtfully selected. So what I actually have is I have two different shades of blue. I have a green. I think you can imagine where those would come from. I have an orange and a yellow that were actually pulled directly out of the storefront right across from the courthouse. And then I have kind of a teal color that helps transition that green to blue. And then I pulled a baseline, instead of using black, I've used a baseline warm gray. It's got a brown content to it, so I'm not sure that it's going to look right up here. I'll kind of show you just so you can see. There might be a little variation, but here we have quite a few different colors, but they're not, they feel like they go together. Now, why do we do it this way? We do it this way because I feel like whenever we deploy this brand out in the public space, we want to make sure that it fits. But I also know that as you go around and you look through the community, you see a lot of brick, you see a lot of earthen tones, you see a lot of greens and that kind of thing. So as I went through, I really treated those blues and teal as my primary bases so that I knew stuff would pop out in the public space. So then finally, the third thing that I look at is I like to look at graphics. And I knew that what I wanted to create for you all was an icon. And there's a big difference between an icon and a logo. A logo normally is a literal image, or it has some sort of literal connection, and a lot of times it is attempting to be illustrative. If we've got this, the current seal, it's got everything in it. It's got corn cobs and cotton bolls and tobacco leaves and factory smokestacks and all that stuff. So the icon, the overall goal of the icon is down the road, once you've earned that recognition, to be able to simply use that graphic all by itself to come to represent the place. So with all the energy that we heard you all talk about with the latest public art piece and what you'd been doing downtown with milling around and that kind of stuff, this millstone seemed to be something that we could potentially use. So that was kind of our inspiration, and I'll show you where we go from there. So we look at typeface, we look at color, we look at graphic, and then the fourth thing is message. And with that message, we create something that we call a brand statement. And we have something that we have kind of an interesting dynamic here, because we have quite a few messages that already exist that we're not attempting to replace. We're attempting to kind of slide something new in the middle. So we know we've got downtown who has successfully been using milling around, and we feel like that needs to stay. We also know that Samson CVB has been using Cultivate Your Spirit. Is that right? Cultivate Your Spirit. The EDC has been using the Positioned Perfectly. Perfectly Positioned. I always get them confused. We did a economic development branding in Iowa, and it was Positioned Perfectly, so I always switch them around. And then there was one more, wasn't there, Aaron? Perfectly Positioned. No, it was those three. Perfectly Positioned, Cultivate Your Spirit, and Milling Around.
Right.
So what we wanted to do was we wanted to figure out how we could kind of slide this overall kind of Clinton identity in there. And the thing that I will say is, with all those other pieces in play, what it actually allows us to do is it allows us a little bit of freedom. It allows us some freedom to not feel this overwhelming responsibility to try to figure out some statement that no one else can say. I actually hate that as a litmus test as to whether something's good or not. I always tell folks, it's like before Nike said just do it, anybody could have said just do it. But they repeated it so much that nobody would go near it now. This is kind of what we're going for here. We wanted something that could really rally the community and get folks to say, yes, that's my pride point. That's what I'm excited about. So I apologize. This will probably have some spelling mistakes in it, but I'm going to see if I can read this to you. We are Clinton, North Carolina, and we invite you to discover this truly special place. You may call it rural, but for over 250 years, people have been drawn to this rich land and the warm community that it nurtures. Clinton served as a place where the crops were sold, where the shafts were milled, and where the harvest was celebrated. We made our livings off the land, and that agricultural heritage is still strong today as we grow tobacco, cotton, sweet potatoes, and raise all types of livestock. Our rural character protects our quality of life and instills in each of us a respect for these bountiful gifts. You may call us too small, but we are all the best of a small southern town, where our roots are strong, whether you've lived here your whole life or you just got here yesterday. We are a community in the truest sense of the word, a place where our neighbors are our friends, where your words still mean something, and where our stories weave and bind us together. Newcomers are quickly welcomed, building relationships based on the charm, personality, and warmth found throughout Clinton. And that spirit grows stronger every day and can be experienced in the grassroots efforts that have built our wellness center, medical mile, and public art and active parks throughout the community. You may call us out of the way, but at the heart of Sampson County, Clinton's pride is palpable. That pride is seen in the well-kept homes all around town, heard in the stands cheering on the Clinton Dark Horses, and felt in the drive to volunteer and give back to this place we call home. This pride creates a magnetism that draws people here, and our warmth and kindness convince them to stay. And at the center of that warmth is our downtown, which is both the foundation of this community and the window to our quality of life, where a child can get an ice cream at the drugstore soda fountain, young professionals can socialize at Alive After 5, or folks can mill around at our shops, boutiques, and restaurants. We are the local wares at the city market. We are the thriving industries and national brands. We are the social events and local bands. We are the crack of the bat and a step down the trail. We are the History Museum's historic tale. We are the image of yesterday. We are the promise of tomorrow. We are Clinton, North Carolina, and we are the perfect place to call home. And you kind of see how that all pulls in together. So we use that very simple icon and image of the millstone, and I drew a stylized version of that. I wanted to simplify it down a little. I created something that would allow us to have 6 different components that would allow us to kind of show off that color. And then you see that very prominent serif typeface, and then below it we have our tagline. Now, I want to kind of go through this. I think seeing it by itself, one of the things that we did was we're going to give you some options in there. I think a good system is a system that has a lot of different options to it. So although this is the primary that I'm showing you, we immediately jump in. First of all, you're always going to have a clean version and a version that's got a little texture to it. Now, here on the right, we see a version that is central, is symmetric, the icon is centered, and the tagline below it, or the modifier below it, is centered. on the left-hand side, we see where we can go a little bit larger with our icon. We can have it rest in that space between the O and the N. And we can also right align that modifier. Obviously, you see here the tagline converts over into North Carolina. It's going to be very, very important for us to make sure that we repeat North Carolina because there are so many Clintons, especially having one directly south of you in South Carolina. That's kind of like the Beaufort thing that we deal with. We've got to make sure that we highlight that. One of the nice things about this, though, here in the center, you can see the full color reversed version. So the same colors work when they're placed on that gray background and the letters go to white and pop out. We also see black and white version. And, you know, I think down the road, you could even, we were talking about how the colors of the school are black and gold. You know, you can even start to do some things down the road that kind of make those, that homage. But we purposely did not want to lean too much that one direction. So, you know, being able to have those opportunities for you. But then also, as you keep going, being able to have reversed one color, the icon is so visually strong. It is circular. It is complete. It allows you that opportunity to have the different colored versions for that. And then one of the cool things I think, and it's maybe it's just me because I'm a nerd or whatever, but you know, down the road as you have it, you can even start to use it where you can de-emphasize those two elements and kind of have it become this stylized C as well. It's all part of that kind of composition of the logo. So you have the foundation for this destination brand, and then from there we start to look at the city identity. And we get to start with the pre-existing seal, which, again, a seal is a very, very important graphic tool. It is not the tool that is intended to market the community. It is the tool that is intended to represent the services and actions of the government. So when I looked at this seal, my first instinct was, oh, there's a lot going on. But for a seal, it also has some real valid points to it. Obviously, if we look at the bottom, well, running through the center, we have a tall, what I'm hoping is some sort of loblolly pine. I'm not sure exactly what kind of tree it is supposed to represent, but obviously we know what the sentiment is there. At the base, we have a cotton boll, we have corn, we have tobacco leaf. It might be cultivated rows of crops behind it. It might be the ocean. I don't know. But then up top, because we are so unbelievably industrious, we've got a cog and a producing smokestack. Now, one of the things that I will say is we see a lot of seals from probably mid-'80s through the '90s who made a point to bring industry into their identity. So we have a lot of smokestacks. If you look at the county seal, it also features industry manufacturing with its smokestack factories. A lot of that stuff has started to go by the wayside in terms of imagery. It's not really the image that folks want to continue to show. So what I did was I took this and I tweaked it. I really didn't change very much of it in terms of content, but I changed it in terms of the art and the composition so that it could be more timeless. It's my opinion that this graphic should have a 50-year lifespan. And because of the fact that you all are still using this, to be honest with you, even though there might be some things we want to change, it has a strong foundation. So what I'm showing here is just a slight modification. We've cleaned it up. We've added some elements to it. We've taken some out. I took the smokestacks out. I replaced them with an image of the millstone on one side, mimicking the gears on the other, kind of speaking to a transition and a growth in economic base. I took a top of a loblolly pine, For a while, I have a full color version that still has a long trunk that runs all the way down it. But in the black and white version, you lose a little bit of detail. But all in all, we've kind of cleaned this up, but we've positioned it to have a lot longer life. Then we tie it to the word type. Because when you look at the composition of the seal by itself, when you look at the height of the name compared to the overall composition, you're talking about 20% of the composition of the quote logo or seal is telling somebody who you are. So we want to be able to couple it with that word type, be able to create the continuity between the organization identity and the destination identity, but still preserving that that look and feel of the seal. Now here we see the full color version. I've gone in and I've done a couple things. I created some gradients in the background that kind of represent those crop rows. But to be honest with you, I think the full color version is kind of busy. A lot of full color versions of seals are busy. So I think you'll probably end up finding yourself using it very sparingly. I went through and I created single color versions, which I think read very, very well. Then we also went through and we created colorized versions of the word type in the one color. Now, a lot of the stuff that the city's going to put out is actually going to be in black and white. So this will give you that standard that you will be able to reproduce photocopies in a quality standard. Now, the next thing that we heard about was the police department. Now, typically, I stray away from the guys with axes and guns, but here they both were interested in seeing something. So what I did was I created a relatively standard variation for a police department. Police department logos, believe it or not, there's not a real broad spectrum of design. You know, pretty much all police departments look like all other police departments. And that's on purpose. That's not actually because there's a lack of creativity. It's because there's an inferred continuity that's needed between law enforcement. So what we did there was I went and I created a crest that could hold the seal. And then we also heard a little bit about black and white, them getting new black and white patrol cars. I didn't know if they were Chargers or not, but are they? So being able to kind of show what the graphics might look like on the vehicle. Same thing with the fire department. If you have driven by the fire department lately and seen the sign out front, the letters, the gold letters on the fire department sign are absolutely classic. Like when we take them off, we need to put them somewhere in a time capsule because they perfectly capture 1984. But, you know, simply being able to have the fire department in the system. Now, the next thing that you guys did was you gave us a stack of brochures that the city puts out. A lot of those brochures were probably, I'm guessing, are printed in-house. Or maybe locally, no matter what. I mean, they looked like they were digital runs. They were relatively short runs, but they were all in full color. So I treated that same standard, and what I did was I simply created a design template for those brochures to exist inside. So whether you're going to go through and do the light bulb recycling program, the mosquito prevention, this is the first time I have ever designed a cover of a mosquito prevention brochure, the recycling guide, the safety guide, and then what the larger piece that you had that I'm kind of renaming the guide to city services. So now all of a sudden, because of that kind of standardized approach, you now have a system of brochures that all very, very clearly tell you that they're coming from the same place. They up the game. Those brochures, the content in those brochures is very, very good. So being able to kind of standardize that across the board, I think will be very helpful. It also will make it very easy for you going down the road to add additional brochures. because essentially it does all the thinking for you, and all you have to figure out is what is the black and white graphic that I'm going to put on the front cover. Now from there, I also wanted to look at some things like business cards. So this is a good example of what you could do with a business card. So you can see here, very small on the content side, I have used the 4-color, but then I've also showed on the back where you could do this kind of large in the 1-color. Now from that, we transition over into the variation for downtown. And I did something a little fun here, because in the public meeting, I asked the question about, is it downtown? Is it Courthouse Square? And the answer really was it's both. And we kind of use them interchangeably. So what I did was I created variations that we can use for both. I took the exact same icon and simply put a mask on it to turn it into a square. Now, you wouldn't want to do that on the front end, but now that you're starting to see it over and over again, all of a sudden, and this is what's so great about the simplicity of a system, now all of a sudden, taking something that was a circle and making it a square becomes clever. When it wouldn't have ever been clever before. But it speaks to expandability. So being able to have a Courthouse Square option, being able to have a downtown option, and going through, you should feel comfortable replacing O's with that icon. You've done it in the past. Downtown Dash did it. So again, being able to show how this is kind of taking that tagline and putting it on the front end, milling around downtown. I think that I think it reads best that way, in that order. And I'm not sure how much you have talked about that, but I've thought about it. I feel like this comes off the most positive, putting mill around on the front end. But then again, one of the things that you all shared with us was the downtown rack card that's getting ready to come out, and simply wanting to show how you might be able to do a cover on that. And what I did with this, I took an image of the cupola on the courthouse. I created what we call a window, which means you cut it out of the background. And then the texture behind it is the texture of mill around. I took a photo of the sculpture. And so now all of a sudden we're taking that public art and it's becoming ingrained in part of our personality. Something else that I started working on, and you'll be able to tell when you see it that it's not done, but an important tool for us to have is a downtown map. So I've started drawing from scratch the map of downtown. This is all vector based. One of the cool things about this is down the road, once I get all the labels on it and all the parking identified and all that kind of stuff, you can use this tool for a lot more than just printing out a glue pad of a map. I actually have one for my community in Delaware, and I have different layers that I turn on and off, kind of like GIS, but I'm able to show them very quickly the business mix in the buildings. I can turn that layer off. I can turn one on that shows vacancies. And it makes the tool of the map a very, very powerful tool. So again, one of the things called for in the assessment was doing an annual report document, since this is the first year, kind of reinforcing that same imagery. But what you might find yourself doing is down the road using this piece to highlight other architectural elements year after year. We're big fans of merchandise, being able to give people the opportunity to show their pride with the place. This was another thing that the assessment report mentioned. So just kind of showing a couple things that you could do in terms of shirts and that kind of stuff. And I cannot stress this enough. When you're designing this stuff, design something that someone wants to wear. Don't design their next grass cutting t-shirt. So being able to kind of be fashionable and creating something that people would be interested in wearing around. The other great thing about a system like this is it converts very, very well to social media icons. That's one of the big problems with logos a lot of times is the logo might look good, but then what happens when I need it to go in a 16 pixel by 16 pixel square? The other great thing about this, and I've already created one, but there's no real way to show it, is we're talking a lot about helping with both the downtown website and the city website. I've converted the circle into what's called a favicon. And that's the little icon next to your web address, or it shows up in your web tabs and that kind of stuff. So again, gives you an additional place for you to be able to roll out that identity. Then we move into what we call brand extension. And brand extension is where we take it to the events. So through using the colors, using the typeface, you now have this opportunity to start tying some of these things in. Taking the same concept that you had before and kind of turning that into a logo that fits into the system. Deconstructing the logo and reassembling it to make a Christmas tree. I have to tell you, I did this logo 3 different times because the first time I did it, I did Christmas on the square by accident. And then the next time I knew that it was Christmas in the city, but somehow I ended up with a version that just said Christmas in Clinton. And I don't even know what I was thinking. So it's like, man, third time of the charm. Another thing that you all asked us to think about was the loyal local card. And I don't think we need to overthink it. I think that focusing in on this concept of loyalty and also I think one of the things that we want to do with this is we want to use this loyalty and affinity program to expand the perception of local. Local does not mean live in the city limits. So being able to use that program to really promote a regional kind of approach to rewarding that loyalty. Then the next thing, market system. You've got the market structure is great. And in fact, I mean, all things considered, what's on the front of it is nice. I mean, there's nothing the least bit wrong with it. So what I was actually picturing with doing a logo for City Market could be something that you could deploy in banners first and don't worry about doing the expensive change to signage. It doesn't make any difference. So what I actually did was kind of designed this way so you could kind of think about it running down the center or maybe running on the side. So as you go through the parking lot, you're getting a pop of color and identity out of that structure. But then the next thing that I did, I will tell you, I took some real creative liberties with Farmers Market. I know the Farmers Market now is the Sampson Farmers Market. I was just kind of playing around and I called it Millstone Farmers Market. I don't know. It doesn't matter. The nice thing is I can go in with a very, simple typing Sampson in. I can change this. But I think that farmers markets are opportunities for us to really cultivate some positive kind of momentum. And I felt like it might be an interesting way that we could get another opportunity for people to kind of connect with that imagery. So that's something to just kind of think about. It's not a make or break, but it's kind of show you how that could work. But then also where it kind of gets fun is with events like movies at the market. And now what you can do is you can take that icon and you can merge it with that movie reel and you can create even more expandability with the system. One other thing that had been talked about was this idea of grown and Sampson. I added home to it. I will tell you, I was working in one community and we had the most interesting conversation about the phrase homegrown, and they decided to stray away from homegrown because they said it was too connected to growing marijuana. I'd never heard that before. Like, I mean, I didn't. I know. I get it, but it's like, really. The thing that I like, I feel like there's a difference between saying something is homegrown and saying something's grown. I almost feel like homegrown can almost take like a personal, like someone can be homegrown, a business can be homegrown, craft can be homegrown. So I felt like by positioning that way, it actually expanded it out a little bit and could make it about more than just what was actually grown in the ground, but could be a little bit more well rounded. Signage. This is, starting to think about a comprehensive signage system that can be deployed throughout the community. There's a lot of stuff on here. We've got Trailblazer signs in the middle. Those are the ones that have 3 destinations on it. We've got 2 different sizes of those. Those are scaled to the roadway and the speed of traffic. Typically, based off of the MUTCD standards that the U.S. Department of Transportation put out in 2009, they like to limit those signs to 3 destinations. We've got public parking signs. We have both monument or pediment style and attached style building markers. You've got a lot of monument style markers out in front of the buildings and that kind of thing. Informational kiosks. Informational kiosks are really great to put at public parking facilities, or where you've got that parking capacity. That's where a person transitions themselves from being in a vehicle to being a pedestrian. So once we get that map done, that would be a great place to share that. We showing a couple of those pediment style and mounted as well. Of course, seeing some banners and things like that. I think one of the things that you all could do, and it's a very simple thing that I'm kind of showing here, but you got these 6 different colors to work with. So you might actually think about using color to help people understand the arteries that lead into downtown. So you might decide that a particular artery kind of adopts one color, and then you have a series of that color as you kind of look down. It helps to create more of a sense of a corridor. I think that is anti intuition, I think, for most communities. A lot of times they like this idea of kind of switching colors every time on banners and that kind of stuff. But what we're actually doing is we want it to slow traffic down. We want people to use those banners to help understand what's going on. So that might be something that we can do. And then finally, on the far right, I think one of the things I always like to remind people is just because you can put a gateway sign somewhere that is not your corporate limits. Oftentimes we'll put that sign out there at our corporate limits, welcome to Clinton, and then our conversation's done. Well, it's absolutely okay to announce arrival into areas that begin to feel special. So, right up here on Lisbon, once you hit the museum, you start to know you're in a different kind of place. I think all of us could pretty easily identify those points where the character changes and it starts to feel different. So doing pole mounted gateways, and it could be reinforcement gateways into the community. It could be additional gateways into a downtown district. But if you do this from an overall approach, I think that the other thing that you could find is going along with the recommendations of the assessment committee, you could very easily add below the sign a historic district designation. So you could have that brown rectangular sign below it saying that you're in College Street Historic District or whatever. And, that assessment has already kind of identified the millstone as the symbol for downtown, the column as the symbol for College, and the front gable, I think, as the chestnut. So, all simple icons. And then from there, just kind of jumping into the look and feel that you can start to portray with this. And what I've done here is I've taken that tagline of a perfect place to call home, And I've started to use that sentence as a platform for variation. And I've actually changed it up in quite a number of ways as we go through the series of ads. But I mean, all these photos that you'll see were taken essentially yesterday. Our weather's been fun, but being able to kind of help people see what it is that the community has to offer, being able to show off some of the products and merchandise, being able to show off some of the character of the community. It's funny because I think that if someone doesn't take the time to get out and explore the stores on their own, it's easy for them to dismiss it as being nothing here. When you go in, there's a lot more than you would expect. And then you find these great things. I mean, this, sitting there, and this evokes the all of the personality of the kind of community that you want to be, where you can go in the gift store and they've got the photo of the engaged couple with their pattern picked out. I mean, it's like, okay, yeah, that's spot on. Highlighting those community assets. You can see, just like I was talking about, all of a sudden you see some of that color in the community and everything seems to really just fit into place. Highlighting some of those amenities, the Ashford Inn, Arts, yeah. What is this called now?
Old College Street. That's the school. It used to be.
What is it now, though?
It's a school. What school?
Once was Head Start.
Oh, okay. It's Head Start. Gotcha. That market building. Aaron took these pictures like 20 minutes before the presentation started with his phone and was texting them to me. Okay, I love this picture. And the reason that I love this picture is, all right, so first of all, you see the barber chair like centered in this open door. But if you look closely, over to the right, the barber is in there, and or I guess she's not a barber. I guess she's a stylist. But she's got her little cape thing on, and she's cutting her own hair in the mirror. And I don't know, there's just something about that. It was just like, that is really, because I've always wondered who cuts a barber's hair, and now I finally answered the question. And just kind of highlighting some of that personality and helping to kind of set that tone. And then I always like to have something funny to end on. But I think the thing that I really like about it, first of all, the system itself is simple. And I think a lot of times we try to overcomplicate things. But you can see all of this stuff was essentially created in a 24-hour period. And that doesn't mean that I'm amazing. It means that the system is common sense. Like, part of the reason we do this the way that we do is because our process forces us to make sure that the product that we deliver can be taken and implemented and easily expanded and grown upon. So I'm pretty excited about how it's coming together. Aaron has assembled a nice long list of deliverables for me that there are quite a few things on there that obviously I haven't gotten to. Leiden has gotten the downtown website up and going. It is a WordPress based site, and he and I have already talked a little bit about being able to migrate that to a new theme. And once we land on this stuff, going through and putting some of that information on there. Of course, the city website is also going to be moving over to a WordPress content management system, and be more than happy to kind of help on that as well. There are a couple other things that as I got going, the way that my mind works is when I stumble up against something that's a little hard for me, I back off and move to another product so I can keep producing while I'm thinking. And there was one thing that I never came to resolution on, and I finally just decided I would rather ask you your help than just pull the trigger. The organization that is the steward of downtown technically is the CDC, but is also one of the oldest Main Street programs in the state. Now, because we have created a downtown identity, I want to make sure that that organization has a logo that fits into the system and shows that they are the ones who are kind of the stewards of downtown. I also want to be able to position them to use all this positive momentum to help get additional volunteers and people involved. But I think the thing that I need help on is, well, how do you refer to the organization, and how do the volunteers, like when someone volunteers, do they think I'm volunteering for Clinton Development Corporation, which I don't think they think? Do they think they're volunteering for Main Street? Or do they think they're just volunteering to the city for downtown?
Downtown is
Okay.
what it's referred to. We refer to Clinton
Okay.
Development. Many people think that's the Center for Disease
Right,
Control.
right.
So it's very few people that refer to the CDC and know who
Okay.
it is. And, like I said, Main Street is something we've tried to educate, and I think our committee members, understand we're on Main Street, but a lot of the general community still doesn't connect Main Street.
Okay.
So that's gonna be an education process that since 2012, we're still on
Right.
the path. So downtown is what they
Okay.
feel like their efforts and their volunteering for.
What
Is
if,
that right, Justin?
Sort of.
Does that feel
does
good
that
to you?
sound good? I mean, that makes sense. I will say this. I think that, in terms of logo, we can do whatever we need to do. I almost feel like, based off of that, one of the things that we might consider is we might want to consider, is there a way that we really kind of tackle this identity of less about Main Street as an organization and more about being a Main Street volunteer?
I think that's a great idea.
You know what I mean?
Because I would like Main Street to be more prominent, just
Right.
because I think it's important at the state level
Mhm.
that we get people using the term locally, because
Right.
we've had so many challenges,
Okay.
with funding and things of that nature.
Yeah.
that it's important.
Because I could almost see now that we have kind of solidified this downtown identity and we've put that milling around with that, it's almost like one of those things where we could create this kind of Main Street volunteer identity, and it's like, well, what do you do as a Main Street volunteer? We're getting downtown rolling, and it's like that's our job, and that's so okay. That's easy. That's easy. Well, look. That was the big stuff I wanted to make sure that I covered. Now it's your turn. I've kept you here for about an hour and 15 minutes, so I know we don't want to drag it out too much longer. But I'd love to hear your thoughts. I'd love to hear your initial response. Does the overall strategy make sense? I know that when you see something foreign like this that is supposed to represent your home, it probably feels very weird on the front end, and it's kind of like, oh, well, I've never seen that before, and I'm supposed to know this place intimately, and this is foreign to me. My hope is that as the presentation went on and you started to see the different ways it could be used and the different imagery and the different ads, it started to really gain some momentum. It's like, yeah, I get where that can go. But
One thing you didn't mention, I'm surprised you didn't, and I don't know if this makes sense or not, but the different colors also speaks to our diversity in our
Right.
community. So that was something, and that y'all didn't mention, but I thought of. So
Yeah, and to be honest with you, I didn't say it, but I really kind of feel like in part of my process when I do it, I don't I don't go and use a lot of colors just because it's pretty.
Right.
You know, so I think you're right. I think that that diversity that I picked up on, the diversity of opportunity, the diversity of people, the diversity of experiences, is the thing that kind of led my gut to say, yeah, I need this. But no, I'm glad that you felt that out of it.
You know, one thing that struck me with it too, in my opinion, this is your time to talk, but you mentioned it. You know, the comment kept coming up this time that we're here, and the time we're here for 3 days, about this community having traditional values, but progressive community, and has energy, and you know, and has momentum and all of that, and the thought of progressively conservative. To me, that icon wraps all of that up, because you've got the colors, you've got the vibrancy, you've got the diversity, but also goes back, and I mean, just like the piece of art wraps it up.
Mm-hmm.
It all, you know, is based on the history of the community, and you know, sort of that tradition of the community, the heritage of the community.
So which typeface was the tertiary one? Because I noticed there was some
Yeah.
one for the.
What I ended up doing, and okay, so you've got Cordia is the one that Clinton is in. And then Gotham is the sans serif. So anytime you see North Carolina, what I ended up doing, and it's funny because I didn't actually realize that I had done it until I started seeing it. There's a script called Sherlock that I should have had on that slide. The Sherlock is the accent.
And
It's-
that was the text.
That was
or
the tagline. It was we saw
Okay.
that used twice.
Okay.
That was used in the tagline for the overall identity, was also used in the milling around. Yeah, yeah, mill around. So that Sherlock is the script there, and then the one that big slab serif is Rockwell that came in
Okay.
for the market.
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, but yeah, I didn't even as I went through and as I presented, I was like, man, you know, I really should have Sherlock on that slide, and I just didn't think about it. So.
Well, I'm about hot to just spill over with what I wanna say, but I wanna hear from y'all too, so.
Well, my experience of that was exactly what you're saying. I mean, at first I was thinking, okay, yeah,
Right.
all right. And then it just kept growing on me. And now looking at this point, I said, oh, I've seen that. It's been around for years.
Right.
Place to call home. I mean, that just, to me, I didn't know, I've tried to stay so far away from them in this process because I didn't want to, I typically, I'm a planner, I like to plan things, I like to have my fingers and stuff. But I have intentionally tried to stay as far away from this as possible, and this is just pleasantly surprised me
Good.
and just.
I'll say this, Mary. I'm not from Clinton, and I've only worked for the city for 5 months now. But it's funny seeing this kind of stuff and how you sort of get like a sense of pride about, like, for me, like where you work, but also see like the potential of what it could become. And I think it's great.
Good.
That's just my, but I'm just
Yeah,
playing.
and from seeing other brands across
Mhm.
the state for other communities, because we've looked at a lot of them, because of, talking about branding and just working with other Main Street communities. Let's get a Main Street award.
Oh, and I'll tell you, I mean, I've done this a lot too, and I really like this. And it is interesting. I mean, to me, like I said, the second community that I ever branded was a Clinton, and every single one has been very, very different. And I just, it is hard and I will tell you, there are some logos that I design that I don't like. And I feel like they're the right thing in certain places, but I just don't really care for them. And as the system continues to go, it's kind of like, I'm ready to get this done because I'm tired of working with this because I don't really like this. How easily this system went, I mean, I got more done for you all. I mean, it probably doesn't look that way, but I spent a lot of time playing around drawing the map. And I don't, I mean, rarely do we ever get to do something like that. And I feel like it's cool, and I feel like it is confident. You know, I feel like it's got this confidence behind it. It's kind of like, man, we don't have to say everything. We just make that and let somebody explore it for themselves. And to be honest with you, if what we've got to say doesn't intrigue them or interest them at all, we don't want them. They're not our kind of people. So
I love it. I love the uniformity of it,
Right.
the look of it, and I think it encapsulates the messages that we like to attract to come here. And I think once the community gets used to it and accustomed, I think they'll take a great sense of pride
Good.
in seeing this. I really am impressed, very much so.
Everything that she said and everybody else
Good.
has said, I'm impressed also.
okay.
This is amazing. I've never been in Brandon committee. I've never seen it done. And it's just astonishing to see that, how, you come up with this.
Well, it was interesting. I was working in a community several weeks ago, and there was a woman on my steering committee, and she said something to me that nobody had ever said before, and with the way my mind works, I really, really appreciated it. She said, I felt like you took something that typically is very subjective. I look at it and I like it or I don't like it. And she said, you made it very scientific. Like, you told me why everything was selected, and you explained to me the components. So even if I didn't like a component, I now understood why it was selected and how it fit into the system. And she said it made me more connected to the strength of it, because I realized that what you were explaining to me is the justification that I'll be able to use against people who just say, "Oh, I don't like it." And that'll typically be the way that things go. Is you'll get to that point where you're ready to start sharing it with somebody. And what happens with me a lot is this meeting in some communities would have been a public meeting. So I'm presenting to 50, 100 people in the community or whatever. Well, there'll be a newspaper reporter there who will take a photo of that one logo, not the whole presentation, but the one logo, and they'll put it up in the newspaper article. And
And see, that's what my mind is reeling right now, because, we're not gonna take this and send it out by email to all our best friends right now.
Right.
I see you jotting down some stuff out there, but we want to be very methodical about how we roll this out
Right.
to people. First of all, sharing it with the mayor and city council, obviously, and then, because we want this to be seen as a big deal. We don't
Absolutely.
want it to kind of break too early, and I think everybody in this room understands that. I don't
Absolutely.
think anybody's fixing to go run to the newspaper and shout out, here's what this is gonna be, because,
Absolutely. And I will tell you, one of the probably the biggest that I've ever been involved in was the launch up in Lee County, which still is one of the craziest things that's ever happened. But I will say, a lot of times what we end up doing, and I'm recording this for that very reason. If there are people that we want to share it with, we would like for them to hear the strategy explained. And
every one of the Main Street committee members, I only have Justin here, kind of breaks my heart, because I'm thinking I can't wait for every one of the other committee members